Arthur Morgan sat on the bench outside the small church, his lungs burning from the tuberculosis that was slowly taking over his body. He could feel death creeping closer with each passing day, and he knew there was nothing he could do to stop it. He had accepted his fate, and all he could do now was try to find peace in his final days. As he bowed his head in prayer, a sudden flash of light appeared in front of him, causing him to look up in confusion. Standing before him was a man that Arthur had never seen before, dressed in modern clothing that seemed out of place in the late 1800s. The man had a mischievous grin on his face, and Arthur could sense an air of confidence and power emanating from him. "Who are you?" Arthur asked, his voice hoarse from the sickness that ravaged his body. The man simply chuckled and extended a hand towards Arthur. "The name's CJ, my friend. And I'm here to help you." Before Arthur could react, CJ grabbed his hand and pulled him through a swirling portal of light, transporting them both to a bustling city unlike anything Arthur had ever seen. The skyscrapers towered above them, and the sound of traffic filled the air. Arthur was bewildered, unsure of where he was or how he had gotten there. CJ grinned at Arthur's confusion and pulled out a metallic wand from his pocket. With a flick of his wrist, he waved the wand over Arthur's body, causing a surge of energy to flow through him. Arthur felt a warmth spreading through his veins, and he could feel the sickness that had plagued him for so long slowly fading away. What did you do?" Arthur stammered, looking at CJ in awe. CJ laughed and shrugged. "Just a little bit of magic, my friend. Nothing too fancy." As Arthur tried to make sense of what was happening, CJ continued to work his magic, using his wand to heal Arthur completely of the tuberculosis that had been eating away at him. Arthur felt stronger than he had in months, and he could hardly believe that he had been saved from the clutches of death by a stranger from another time. "Thank you," Arthur said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to repay you for what you've done." CJ waved off Arthur's thanks with a smile. "No need for repayment, my friend. I'm just glad I could help. Besides, it's not every day that I get to save a cowboy from the Wild West." As the reality of his situation sank in, Arthur couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Here he was, a gunslinger from the 1800s, saved by a modern man with a magical wand. It was a tale straight out of a fantasy novel, and Arthur found himself strangely grateful for the unexpected turn of events. As the two men stood in the bustling streets of Los Santos, Arthur couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder at the world around him. The city was a far cry from the dusty towns and open plains of the Wild West, and he was amazed by the sights and sounds that surrounded him. CJ led him around the city, showing him the sights and introducing him to the modern marvels that filled the streets. As they walked, CJ regaled Arthur with stories of his own adventures in Los Santos, from gang wars to high-speed chases. Arthur listened with rapt attention, amazed by the tales of a city far different from the one he had known. He found himself warming up to CJ, grateful for the friendship that had been forged between them in such unusual circumstances. As the day turned to night, CJ led Arthur to a small apartment where he could rest and recover from his ordeal. Arthur settled in, still trying to make sense of the whirlwind of events that had brought him to this strange new world. He couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude towards CJ, the unlikely hero who had saved him from a fate worse than death. As he drifted off to sleep, Arthur couldn't help but wonder what other surprises this new world held for him. But for now, he was content to rest and recover, grateful for the unexpected ally who had come to his rescue in his time of need. And as he closed his eyes, Arthur Morgan knew that he was ready to embrace whatever adventures lay ahead, with CJ by his side as his unlikely savior and friend. The magic of Los Santos had saved him from death, and he was determined to make the most of this second chance at. Arthur Morgan sat on the bench in the peaceful meadow, his hand clasped in prayer as he spoke to Sister Jane. The tranquil setting did nothing to calm the storm raging inside him. He knew he was dying, consumed by the cruel grip of tuberculosis. The illness had taken its toll on his body, weakening him with each passing day. As he confided in Sister Jane about his fate, a sudden disturbance caught his attention. Through the haze of his pain and despair, Arthur saw a figure approaching. A figure that seemed familiar, yet out of place in the serene surroundings of the meadow. It was CJ, the infamous gangster from Los Santos in the world of Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas. Arthur's confusion grew as CJ reached out, grabbing his hand and pulling him towards a shimmering portal that had materialized out of thin air. Before Arthur could protest or make sense of the situation, he found himself in a different world altogether. The bustling streets of Los Santos surrounded him, the noise and chaos a stark contrast to the quiet meadow he had just been in. CJ wasted no time, producing a metallic wand that glowed with a mysterious power. With a wave of his hand, he cast a spell that enveloped Arthur in a warm, healing light. The effects were immediate. The pain in Arthur's chest eased, his fever broke, and the telltale signs of tuberculosis disappeared as if they had never been. Arthur was dumbfounded. He had heard tales of magic and mythical creatures, but never in his wildest dreams did he imagine that he would be the recipient of such otherworldly powers. CJ, on the other hand, seemed almost nonchalant about the whole affair, as if saving a dying man's life was just another day in the office for him. As Arthur tried to make sense of the situation, CJ flashed him a grin and a wink, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Just another day, huh?" he quipped, his voice filled with a playful tone that belied the gravity of the situation. Arthur couldn't help but chuckle at CJ's irreverent humor. Here was a man from a world completely different from his own, yet their shared experience of facing death had bonded them in a way that transcended time and space. Together, they roamed the streets of Los Santos, CJ regaling Arthur with tales of his exploits in the criminal underworld. Despite the danger and chaos that surrounded them, Arthur felt a sense of camaraderie with his newfound friend. They were two souls brought together by fate, each with their own demons to face and their own battles to fight. As they delved deeper into the city's underworld, Arthur began to realize the true extent of CJ's power and influence. He was not just a mere mortal. He was a legend in his own right, a hero in a world where chaos reigned supreme. And as they faced off against rival gangs, corrupt officials, and otherworldly threats, Arthur found himself drawing strength from CJ's unwavering determination and unshakable courage. Together, they fought side by side, two warriors from different worlds united by a bond that defied logic and reason. In the end, when Arthur finally faced his own mortality once more, he did so with a sense of peace and acceptance. Thanks to CJ's unexpected heroism, he had been given a second chance at life, a chance to make amends for his past sins and to forge a new path for himself. As he looked back on his journey with CJ, Arthur knew that he would always be grateful for the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. In a world filled with darkness and despair, their friendship was a beacon of light, a reminder that even in the face of death, hope and redemption were always within reach. And so, as the sun set over the city of Los Santos, Arthur Morgan and CJ stood side by side, two unlikely heroes bound by fate and forged in the fires of adversity. Together, they faced the challenges that lay ahead, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could overcome anything that came their way. Arthur Morgan sat on the bench outside the church, his hands clasped together in prayer. He had just been diagnosed with tuberculosis, and the news weighed heavily on his mind. His time was limited, and there was nothing he could do to change his fate. As he prayed for comfort and strength, he felt a presence beside him. Looking up, he saw a man standing in front of him, a smirk on his face. Arthur recognized him immediately as CJ from GTA San Andreas, a famous character from a video game. He was confused as to why CJ was standing in front of him, in the real world. Before he could question CJ's sudden appearance, the other man grabbed his hand and pulled him up from the bench. In an instant, they were both surrounded by a swirling vortex that transported them to a familiar city, Los Santos. Arthur was disoriented and confused as CJ led him through the streets of Los Santos, passing by familiar landmarks from the game. Finally, they arrived at a hidden underground chamber where CJ revealed a metallic magical wand. With a flick of his wrist, CJ used the wand to heal Arthur of his tuberculosis. Arthur's weakened body suddenly felt strong and healthy again. He looked at CJ in disbelief, unsure of what was happening. CJ chuckled at Arthur's bewildered expression. "Relax, cowboy," he said with a grin. "I may be from a different world, but I've got some tricks up my sleeve to help a fellow comrade in need." Arthur couldn't help but be amazed at the unexpected heroism of CJ. He had never imagined someone from a video game would come to his rescue in such a fantastical way. As they walked through the streets of Los Santos, Arthur tried to make sense of his bizarre situation. Along the way, CJ used his humorous and playful nature to lift Arthur's spirits. He cracked jokes and told stories from his own adventures in Los Santos, making Arthur laugh and forget about his worries for a while. As they continued on their journey, Arthur realized that CJ's presence had brought a sense of hope and lightness to his life. The two unlikely companions forged a bond based on their shared experiences and the joy of unexpected friendship. In the end, Arthur Morgan found himself grateful for the magic and whimsy that CJ had brought into his world. Through their adventures in Los Santos, he learned that sometimes, heroes can come from the most unexpected places, and that true friendship knows no boundaries, not even between different worlds.